Welcome. Today's program is about the election, which is not certified in Washington State until next Tuesday, and what the impact is on us in Washington State and for us as citizens of the U.S. As I watched the election results come in on November the 4th, I kept thinking back to a little political cartoon I had seen in 2010, and it was from Joel Pett of the Lexington Herald Leader. It was in September of 2010, and he has two men walking down next to a big building coming toward the same corner on the sidewalk. The first one is just really grumpy and down and out, and he's got a big sign, "Throw the bums out." The other one, coming down the other sidewalk, can't see one another, he's got an equally big sign that says, "Throw the previous bums back in." So, the question is today, is that where we are again? I mean, or is that too cynical a look? We have big potential consequences. We have gridlock in Olympia, some say. Some say we have gridlock in Washington, D.C. Will that continue? What about the chances of fully funding our state's education system in Washington State? Will we get a solid transportation package passed? And at the national level, will there be another government shutdown, or two, or three, over the next couple of years? What are the prospects for real immigration reform, the Trans-Pacific Partnership, and other headline issues? Will we have government by executive order over the next 2 years? These are big questions, and fortunately, I'm not here to resolve them for you, but we do have a panel of experts, people who have been steeped in politics for a number of years and are going to give you a little introductory statement, each one, and then we'll have questions and dialogue, interchange, and then there'll be time for questions from our badge-wearing members at the end. I would like to introduce our panel members, and the first one I'm going to introduce is Cathy Allen, who has been here before. In fact, she was here to talk about a very different election that happened 2 years ago in the presidential cycle.
Yeah, that was the one that was throw the other bums out.
Yes, right. So Cathy has spent the past 20 years working to help communities, governments, nonprofit associations, and women's groups better communicate to the press, the public, and politicians. She has conducted trainings and been a consultant in more than 34 states, 8 provinces in Canada, and 18 countries, Europe, North Africa, many, many places. She's also a co-founder of the Center for Women and Democracy at the University of Washington. She's run or consulted with more than 500 winning campaigns, 75% of which are for women, which she'll like that for, of course, from mayors to governors, from state legislators to the U.S. Congress, from initiatives to slates of women endorsed by women candidates. You see her a lot on TV in Seattle area. She's around a lot, and also she is on the board of the American Association of Political Consultants. So there's a lot. You can go to her website, the Connections Group, and you can read a lot more about Cathy. Jerry Cornfield is our next person. He's a reporter for the Daily Herald in Everett. He joined the Herald in 2004, just in time for the historic gubernatorial race between Dino Rossi and Chris Gregoire. He's based in Olympia, where his primary duty is to cover lawmakers and state government. As a native of California, he began his journalism career as a sports reporter in Northern California. Now he's into political sports. He worked at newspapers throughout the San Francisco region before moving to Santa Barbara, where he wrote for a weekly newspaper and then produced and hosted a morning radio talk show and served as editor-at-large for Santa Barbara magazine. In Santa Barbara, Jerry also hosted a weekly TV show focused on community issues. Here in Washington, he's appeared on several political and public affairs programs in Olympia and Seattle. And if you might have seen him on Impact about 2 weeks ago Friday, he was on there. Okay, now I've got one more paper that's sticking here. This is our last guest and panelist, Bruce Boram. He's currently a political and public affairs consultant with his company, Laurus Associates. It's based in Seattle. He provides all kinds of public affairs consulting, from rapid response crisis management, direct mail services, broadcast media services, fundraising, grassroots lobbying communications, and general strategic campaign services. But before that, he was also directly involved in many campaigns. He started out with John Miller in 1989. He has worked with numerous presidential and congressional campaigns, and in Washington State, he's worked with the Washington State Republican Party and both House and Senate campaign committees, and in Oregon with House Republicans. Bruce ran Washington State's business PAC, United for Washington, now Enterprise Washington, for 11 years, and has extensive experience running independent expenditure and issue advocacy campaigns. He was a founding member and president of Advanced Data Center Systems, Incorporated, the company that conceived and developed the Voter Vault voter data system that was used by the Republican National Committee and all Republican state parties. Bruce also serves on the board of Maestrosoft, Incorporated, an leading maker of charitable event and management software. So you see, we have panelists who are steeped in politics, have lots of experience, and they're going to start off by each giving us a little bit about their take on what happened and what's the impact in Washington State and nationally. Cathy, how about you first?
Got it. It's a pleasure to be back. I want to say that this last year and last 2 years, as a matter of fact, have brought me up to Bellingham, which I'm very much becoming quite ensconced in the campaigns and politics up here. I love it. I should say that this has been a great opportunity. This last year I had a chance to work for the I would say, put upon 42nd District for the forces of good that were indeed overcome by the forces of evil. And so from that perspective, I can say I met some of the most fantastic people, and I have to say that I had a chance to work with Satpal Saidu, who is perhaps one of the most wonderful people I've ever met, and he is truly somebody that I think you will see again on the political scene. I'm trying to get him to move to Seattle as opposed to just, Bellingham, but the fact is that it's a tough one up there. So here, it is good to be here, not only just to be able to talk a little bit about politics, but to talk a little bit about what didn't happen and what did happen. The fact is, I am thrilled to be in front of people who actually care. Most of the people in Seattle are like, please don't talk to me. Talk to the hand. I don't want to hear it. I don't want to hear it. Because they think that things were far worse than they really are. In the real world, I look at what happened and said, okay, things have come and gone, but there are things that are not nearly as bad as you would think. The most concerning to me is there is a new divide. If you went through the actual election of our state legislators, what you would find is an incredible set of numbers that were 56-13, 56% and 13%. Over half of the races where Republicans won, they won 56-13. Yet if you look at the Democrats, over half of the ones they won were a little bit between 54% and 46%, like that. What's happened, I think, is that there's a great divide, but it's not so much DNR as much as it is MSNBC and Fox. That what's happened is that you find that people who are very much falling into these, I would say, the silos that are I don't really want to think too hard on these things, so I'm going to go with my brethren who watch Fox, or my brethren that actually are watching Rachel. In all of this, I've started to see that divide that I used to think was so interesting really is now becoming far more of a critical divide. I want to say that Democrats, what we don't do very well, we don't stay in power very well. The fact is we hate status quo. Never liked status quo. Status quo is supposed to be the enemy. We've been down so long that status quo has always been the thing we want to change. Well, guess what? If people are looking for change, we be it. And so here in Washington State, when people wanted to say, I don't like what's going on, I'm just feeling miserable, I'm depressed, I don't know you guys are doing anything, the fact is that they had to take shots at status quo, and that would be a big D on it, a big D. And so I didn't think that was such a bad deal. What I know is that The Democrats I knew this last year, we discovered something we hadn't seen in a very long time, that we had become kind of estranged to, and that was the sun, that big thing in the sky that was warm. So we went fishing, and we went swimming, and we went boating. I never saw so many Democrats who made up such wonderful excuses as to why they weren't going to be able to go door to door and talk to voters. The fact is, we took the summer off, then we came back, decided we were already so far ahead, we'd get into queue next year. And I think that we saw an enormous kind of deflating effect on the voters. What we've done, and I've already pulled a number of the numbers from up here, as a matter of fact, as well as statewide. What we found is we have never had a year where more of the 4 out of 4 voters did not vote in the Democratic Party. Indeed, in the Republican Party, they had a 2% increase. We had a 16% decrease in some of these different areas. So the people who always vote, there are some of you here who did not, and you let us down because of it. The other part is, I got to say that it may be also because we just didn't offer a good enough set of answers. One other astounding thing that I noticed is that the Democratic message, in many cases, did much better than the messengers, that maybe our messengers were just not nearly as strong. What was astounding to me is the messages of minimum wage. Minimum wage, 1 in 4 of the most unlikely states, from my own former Alaska to South Dakota to Arkansas, for goodness sakes, and yet the Democratic incumbents in those states all lost. So the people ended up being able to tell us, yeah, I like some of these messages. I do believe you guys represent a little more of the forces of the rest of us, but the people you're sending up, I just don't have faith in. Here's an astounding and horrifying subject, and that is, I took a look at what happened in 2002. We did a statewide poll here and asked, well, if there's something going on with the economy, do you really think the government can do anything about it? 63% of the folks here in Washington State, voters, they said, yeah, I do. I believe that, 63%. That's 2002. Last week, we did the same poll, 600 people statewide. 26% thought that government could do something. In fact, one woman said to me, well, yeah, sure, the government is really good at creating jobs, government jobs. I'm like, oh, I don't want to hear it. The fact is that that's a little bit about what was out there. I can also say that where we didn't necessarily have a good year when it comes to the big issues, I don't think that education took any great steps forward. Don't think that the economy did. Don't think that we saw much happening in the area of public safety, which, as I was explaining to my brethren here, that right now what we see more than anything is there is a huge increase in what people are feeling might be the most important issues, and public safety is now number 2. Public safety. I feel pretty safe. I mean, my friends up here don't even lock the doors half the time. So the fact is that people are thinking that, something, these burglaries are bothering me. The little crimes that are now becoming kind of cultural crimes, I've had it with them. I've had it. So indeed, what we've also found is that where the big issues are actually hanging around, just flagrating out there, the problem we have now is the little guys are doing quite well. Things like marijuana is winning everywhere. We see things like, in some cases, that not only minimum wage, but we see in terms of even here, seeing the gun laws that passed. I have to say that this has become a time when the real issues that people get hot and bothered about are actually being able to play their way out when it comes to the initiatives. But the things that we expect government to do just isn't happening.
Okay, Bruce, your turn.
Okay. So this has been an interesting cycle for me. This is the first cycle in like 20 years where I haven't been heavily involved in campaigns and doing more public policy work. So it's kind of strange for me to kind of get the 30,000-foot view. It's always interesting for me to hear about Democrats when things don't go quite their way, and how they feel, oh my God, the world is ending. Republicans don't feel like that they've won the day. There's not a mandate here. But what's very interesting about this election is what you're seeing is a lot of cynicism and frustration from the public. And that is why people stayed home, and that's why Democrats stayed home. And I think whenever you have an inspirational candidate at the national level, like we've had with President Obama, and things maybe don't go quite the way people hoped that it would, that is hard. And I think what you've seen, and I think to a certain extent you've seen that here at the state level, and I think that will impact turnout. Both parties see this happen all the time. And Don's comment about the cartoon is dead on. So politics is very cyclical, and I think we all realize that, right? Some parties go in, some parties go out, and that's what we see. But what you're starting to see is the cycles are shortening. And it's because it is throwing the other bums out. People get frustrated, they either stay home or they decide that they're gonna vote out the other party. So you started to see a little bit of that. The other thing that happened is that voter intensity, which is something that we look at, was higher on the Republican side of things this time, without question. A lot of Republicans, I'm sure, and I haven't looked at the numbers, Cathy would probably know this, but I'm sure there was a big spike, higher spike in Democrat voting at the end, as there are Republicans, because Republicans were getting their ballots and they were voting. Democrats are like, do I really want to look at this thing? Do I really want to cast a vote? Because they're struggling a bit. So, that is what I took away from it. Now, the other very interesting thing to me about this whole campaign, and you all are very familiar with this topic, is Tom Steyer and the money that was put into those races. Now, as Don mentioned, I used to do most of the independent expenditure in the state during the 90s. And money doesn't buy races. As a matter of fact, if you put too much money in, it turns the public off. You also got to consider how a lot of that money is spent. At the legislative level, you're not buying a lot of TV. Now, up here in the 42nd, where you have this nice little radio market, which I love, you can do more radio, but you almost can't spend it. And you guys, you read every single piece of mail that came in your mailboxes, right? Oh, I guess you didn't.
Just the ones I did.
Yeah, okay. Oh, Cathy does great work, by the way. But and a lot of that money gets wasted. And, it's kind of an interesting side note. When I used to do a lot of this kind of work, a lot of these guys who come in and dump all these millions, they're very enthusiastic about wanting to do it in the beginning. There's usually a period of really significant disillusionment when they realize how much their money has been wasted. So, really, all politics is local. And a lot of what happened, another key thing about this year that's very interesting, so when you have a year like this where one side or the other is not as enthusiastic, so if you're a Democrat candidate and you're a prominent individual and you're a person who would be a good candidate, and you looked at 2014, did you go, yeah, this is the year I'm going to win? No, you didn't. You didn't. If you're a Republican, you did. So like an example would be a story that I love is Melanie Stambaugh on the 25th, right? This is a young woman, 24 years old. She doorbelled 17,000 households. Now you can't do that in every district, as you all know. In some more rural districts you can't. But in those districts where you can go out and you spend the time and you burn the shoe leather and you connect with voters, that's how you win. And that's intensity at the candidate level and at the voter level. So anyway, this is a fascinating election cycle for me. We're kind of going through a bit of a change where, I'm almost tired of hearing the paradigm was broken again this year. Well, the paradigm's been breaking every cycle for the last 10 years. So it's a lot of fun for people like us who follow this, but so that's basically what I have to say.
Okay, Jerry, you're up.
Well, I want to thank you all for inviting me up here and attending and give me a chance to meet face-to-face after years of a legal phone relationship with Cathy. We now, I see and get some statistics, but I'm in Olympia, and my paper's in Snohomish County, and so I have to confess this was one of the most boring elections because Snohomish County really didn't have anything to fight over the way many other counties in the state, Whatcom County, Mason County, Thurston County. And we, from a Snohomish County and to a greater degree stepping back from my view, it was very much a status quo election on those who were supposed to win won. If you look at Congress, we didn't change any members of Congress. The 4th District, we have a new person there. It's a Republican for another Republican. So, there hasn't been great swings that are going to affect the state, in my view, but except in the House. And one of the consequences of this election and I may dare say, I may make a couple of analytic predictions, but the House is really going to be interesting to watch this year because the Republicans picked up 4 seats, Melanie being one, and uniquely 3 of those 4 are women. So Republicans this cycle really, they elected women, and in some cases, they unseated women in the Democrat Party. So you'll get some more candidates maybe to try. So it's now 51 Democrats, 47 Republicans. Next year, I think the Republicans are going to pick up an open seat. There's going to be a special, not open, it's a special election in a district where Representative Roger Freeman had passed away, and so that seat will be on the ballot next year. And if the Republicans win that, it'll move it even closer, 50 to 48. And I dare say by 2018, if not in 2016, Republicans may be back in charge in the House. But by being 51-47, you're going to see possibly a sort of a majority coalition caucus have to form in the House. You may not be, Frank Chopp, the Speaker, may not be able to keep 50 or 51 members together on all the issues. And the 2 members in the Puyallup area, Melanie and Hans Zeiger, there are a couple of good votes for transportation. The Democrats may go pick up a couple of votes like theirs for transportation if they can't keep all of their Democrats in line. So in many ways, it was a status quo election. What we're going to see in terms of the membership. I'll get to the politics in a second, but another issue on the low turnout hurting Democrats and Republicans, I noticed in Snohomish County, there was a large wave of late Republican voters. And what I saw on the local level in Snohomish County there were 3 measures on the ballot that dealt with taxation. They all went down, and just a couple, and they were in Linwood, they were in Arlington. The voters turned down a small measure to replace school buses. There was a fire district that failed to get its emergency services levy renewed. And this is just a year after 2 of the most conservative communities passed taxes increases in their community. In Monroe and Arlington had passed one. So the low turnout played out in some interesting ways, and those communities are going to have to figure out what they do with their issues that are concerning them. The other element I just want to put out there, and I'll be interested to hear if others think, but I think we in Olympia like to pronounce the end of the initiative promoter Tim Eyman. We keep saying, "Oh, this is it." And we're always wrong, and he's from Mukilteo, so we cover him more than we cover some of our candidates. But this election may have proven that Mr. Eyman and the Fagan Spokane have been priced out of the initiative market. I mean, we saw $10 million spent on the Initiative 594, $5 million on 1351, and I just don't believe Mr. Eyman's going to be able to come up with that kind of money. And he needs, $500,000 to $1 million to get something on the ballot. So this is a change. The high-priced initiatives and, the issues that are passing, these are progressive issues. The progressive agenda is getting shorter and shorter because it's being changed via initiative. That's going to be a trend I'll be interested to see whether or not we see again.
Actually, Jerry, I have to tell you bad news. Today, Tim Eyman filed the initiative to roll back Seattle's minimum wage.
Right, but he only has $100,000. He only has $100,000 and that's not enough to get the signatures.
It's not a statewide campaign.
Yeah.
He's decided just to go to the heart of where most Washington hates people anyways, is from Seattle. So, yeah, but he filed it today and just is doing the press conference. So he's just looking for a way to be able to continue to make money.
Yes, but he did alienate some of his base in the business on what recent ones. So we'll see if they go with him or if they go it alone. But I know there'll be questions about what's going to happen at Olympia, so I'll just put out front there that I go back and forth whether or not it'll be like 2013 with 2 special sessions and we're watching the clock and writing stories about what happens if they don't get a budget by June 30th. I lived in California where July 1 was the beginning of the fiscal year, and we just marked our calendars July 10th, July 20th, that's when they were going to adopt a budget. So we're used to this kind of thing. I go back and forth. I think crises and this close divided government that we have right now in the state may force them to just winnow down the list of things they need to do and want to do when they get out on time. I mean, there aren't that many options, let's be frank, about how they're going to pay for things. Then the other day, they'll wake up and say, okay, they're going to go here a while, but it'll be one special session. They'll start on like May 30th, knowing they got till June 30th, and I'll have time for a vacation. I just don't want them to go all the way a full year, because then we don't get a break. But I do think there's a chance that Olympia will it won't be quite as bombastic for 4 months, and it won't, there'll be a little bit of hyperbole early on, and then they'll realize, we got to get it done, and they get it done.
Okay, so now we're going to move into some issues or some things that came up, maybe not just policies, but for example, if, again, another quote from David Letterman's November 4th monologue, take a look at this, gas under $3 a gallon, under $3 a gallon, unemployment under 6%, whoever thought, stock market breaking records every day, no wonder the guy is so unpopular. So that was the president. So here's the question. How do you explain the seeming getting on of the track shoes of Democratic candidates and running in the opposite direction of where the president was, or was going to be?
I think this starts with a little bit about perception of what little press still remains. And I point out that Jerry gets our award for at least a paper that still cares. In terms of the amount, his was the only in the state that actually had less than a 5% cut in campaign coverage. The rest of the state average, including the Seattle Times, actually had a 20 to 30% cut in actual news coverage. In fact, what I would say that right now, what was more impactful in this last election was when stories broke or when editorial opinions or endorsements came out, as opposed to any coverage at all. What's happened in this last go-round is that the press really did become one of a defense as opposed to an offense. There was very little I saw that really was insightful coverage of any major issue whatsoever, except for, isn't Obama really unpopular? And isn't it, everything that poor Obama has done is just made everyone else's life more miserable in terms of if you were carrying a progressive message of any kind whatsoever. I think that we started to believe a lot of that. A lot of it has to do with even our progressive folks that were covering MSNBC or CNN in some cases. The fact is, or even sometimes King 5, what we found is that the major news was never at all going to say anything about Obama except that he's more unpopular today than he was yesterday. And that kind of overview, and the guy never fought back. He's just doing this kind of like, kind of like this mellow kind of like, I'll just wait for it to be over. It's almost over anyways. The fact is that I think that we all fell into the bad-mouthing. In fact, healthcare, the great, huge, nasty hole that was supposed to have been the reason that we would be unelected in all districts this year. Well, most people looked at healthcare right now. Kaiser poll just finished last week showed that 16% of the people actually thought that they were personally helped by Obamacare, that it helped their family. 31% felt it actually hurt their family. And the rest of the people said, can you just find another subject to talk about? Because I just don't care about it anymore. I don't want to talk about it because you know what? Prices are going to go up and maybe coverage will be different. But really what this was is more of a national agenda seeping into local agendas than they usually do. And they always do. I mean, the fact is that whoever is on top, whether they're popular or not in D.C., matters a lot, every place else in the country.
How much do you think is that? I wonder how much do you think there's a parallel in Washington, it feels like, with divided government and the governor's relationship with the legislature and the president's relationship with Congress and the nation. I mean,
I think that I would be more apt to say that on the national level, it is probably more effective. I think on the local level, most of the legislature, House and Senate, kind of disavowed their relationship with Inslee. He was not the leader. Yeah, I don't think that they saw him. I don't think they saw Frank Chop as the leader either. I think that what this was all about was it could be anarchy, or it could just be the sun came out.
I mean, both of them, even in this campaign cycle, we're talking about the president came here,
Yeah.
but pretty much hidden into certain parts of the state.
Not hidden. We were collecting money for it. Are you kidding me?
But
I'm going to make a brief comment to answer your question, then we can move on to the next one. The question you have to ask yourself is, with all those numbers and the president's numbers are still declining, why do people feel that way? Because clearly, if employment's good, gas prices are good, why is everybody concerned? Because clearly they are. So we're still coming out of the Great Recession. There's a lot of people who are still waiting for the other shoe to drop. Government is not providing the confidence in their future that they want. And you can talk about what Obama's done. I mean, the Affordable Care Act and how that was, I mean, that is the biggest self-inflicted wound I have ever witnessed in my entire life. I mean, execution is everything, and that was, that should have been a very positive thing for the Obama administration, really did not obviously turn out that way. But the bottom line is, what electeds need to ask themselves is, why are they not instilling a confidence in the public? Because clearly they're not. And I would also suggest that there are still people who are still digging themselves out of the recession. We're still seeing foreclosures, and we're still seeing, there's a lot of people who are still trying to build back. And so that's the question every public official has to ask yourself. Are you providing confidence to your constituents for the future? And I would say for the vast majority, the answer is no.
But I'm sensing there's sort of two publics in some ways, because up in, say, for example, Snohomish County, and I go there because there's some good examples, Boeing is there. You've got a private sector union, thousands of folks really upset. And they're starting to, and they're feeling disengaged, and they're mad at government for taking sides in their dispute. And then you've got teachers and you've got public sector unions, they're upset with government for different reasons than the general public, and it's an interesting divide out there.
That's a really good point, and let me expand on that a little bit. So I do a lot of public policy work that has to do with a lot of the regulations that we're going to be seeing on climate change and things like that. I talk to a lot of labor unions, building trades, maritime unions, the machinists that are very, very, very concerned. Not that they're coming out against the governor, but they are very concerned that a lot of the policies that are being put in place from a regulatory standpoint are going to cost their members jobs. And I am able to get these people to come to meetings and talk and come on board and really talk seriously about their concerns to the governor. I've never seen that before. So that plays into Jerry's comments, I think, very directly.
Okay, here's another one. Given the expense of running campaigns now, how do we get people to be independent thinkers to run as candidates rather as people who are spending their time not talking to constituents but being on the telephone getting money all the time?
Well, if you want independent thinkers, all you have to do is elect women.
From either party?
From either party.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
I think I've heard that
unfortunately,
before.
From either party. From either party. That is the one thing about this, is that the Republicans learned our deep, dark secret, which is we always found all those great women to run. And ironically, what the Republicans did was they stole that tactic from us and started putting all of those women up. And it's sort of like the most incredible thing. Look at this. Haitian American woman from all white Utah, and a young mother, I would say of Latino descent, Indian American immigrant. In taking a look at the number of women who won that were Republican, including this marvelous beauty pageant winner from Puyallup, that is in one of the most swing districts of the state, all Republicans. Youngest congressperson in the country now, 22-year-old from North New York, a Republican. And all of these pretty progressive, either pro-choice, and they actually have a brain, I think, in most cases. So.
Well, to get to the heart of your question, it's like public financing versus campaign limits and campaign finance, and that whole discussion, right? We live in a media age. You have to get your message out. People need to, this is America. You need to earn what you get. Now, I agree that money has a negative impact on politics, but in this case, a lot of the campaign finance reform that I see, where the cure is worse than the disease.
Yes.
So while we need to continue to regulate campaign finance, we need to continue to look at it, we need to continue to refine it. It's unfortunately a necessary evil, and I think if you don't have the, you're not buying votes. You're not. Maybe you're buying access. We can talk about that if you want, but you still got to put yourself out there, and raising money is part of putting yourself out there. So I don't see the current system. Is it perfect? No, but any of the dramatic changes we're talking in campaign finance, I think, do more harm than good in the long run.
Jerry?
Well, I just want to, as one who covers campaigns and been covering them for a couple of decades, and coming from California where big money has been an issue for a while, something Bruce said earlier about how the money is spent has become, in my mind, very, very important in Washington, more so than when I arrived. You mentioned Tom Steyer, and he's just another boogeyman in some ways, but he wasted his money, and I could have told him, if he'd asked me before he wrote a check, I would have told him it's a waste of money because the issues he's pushing were not on the agenda of voters this year. But some of that money, and just so you know, on October 10th, as I happen to be looking at what was going on with some of these special interest groups, on October 10th, there were 3 payments made. He made a payment for about $500,000 to an environmental coalition that was pushing the candidate against Senator Erickson. That group paid for a poll, and then they spent $350,000 on an organization that hires people and pays them to go door to door. Okay, so if they aren't using volunteers to get votes. And I'm looking at that and I'm saying on October 10th, that's a week before ballots go out, what could they possibly have seen in a poll that said they had a chance of upsetting the incumbent senator, that they could get $500,000 out of this guy to try to campaign? And so, that was a waste of money. It was bad advice. And so better yet, and what I haven't seen around here for a few years is, where were the candidates holding rallies? Where are the candidates doing town halls? Where are the candidates doing public events? I mean, this year, the congressional candidate against Pedro Celis, he was barring press from his fundraisers.
I know.
I mean, they don't really want coverage in some ways, and they're not accessible to the public. So I think somewhere in there, the candidates are becoming out of touch on the campaign trail. They think walking on and knocking on 17,000 doors makes a difference if you meet voters at the doors. But if you're just knocking and leaving something on, and a lot of candidates do that, and then they tell us they've talked to voters, and I don't think they have. So I'm not too worried about the amount of money. It's how they spend it, and when are they going to get back out into the public eye in forums like this, debating each other, just on and on and on, so public can see them.
Mm-hmm.
And I would just make one more comment, which a lot of people disagree with, but I think about this. So we put more and more regulations on campaign finance. Limits, I don't think we should have limits. And I think that you should only have disclosure, especially in the digital age. And I'll tell you why. So you hear a lot about these super PACs, and you hear about Citizens United, and you hear about independent expenditure and issue advocacy, and I have done a lot of that work, and I know how it works. And it's big money, and it comes in late, and it can be pretty destructive. But when a candidate has to put his name on something that goes out there, that changes the tone of what's being done. Mm-hmm. And if you don't have limits, and money is going directly into campaigns, it's not going into third-party groups and takes away from their power. So I would just consider that.
Yeah, I would too.
Okay, great. Thank you. Well, let's look at the state of Washington now and complying with the McCleary decision. What is the hope of getting something, and what's the recourse if we have the battle between the legislature and the Supreme Court? Any possibilities of resolution? And it's a lot of money we're talking about, so where does it come from?
Well, and you can add the class size initiative and what that's going to
Yeah.
do.
Exactly.
Right.
You want me to put my little
Yep.
crystal
Yeah.
ball?
Yeah, you
First
go
off,
first.
the Supreme Court let me down. I'm one of the reporters that was rooting for them to put Frank Chop behind bars. And then every day for 147 days, a different lawmaker spent a
There you
night
go.
in jail. That would be a contempt
That'd be
of
good.
court. It would be worth writing about. But a contempt
Reality
finding
show.
that says you're in contempt, but we'll give you about 6 or 8 or whatever number of months it takes you to finish your budget, and then we'll decide if there's going to be a penalty. It didn't feel quite as severe a punishment. So here's the 2 things I imagine are going to happen. And today, just there was the revenue forecast came out in the meeting on there about how much money the state's going to have. Revenues are coming up. They're going to have about $275 million more dollars as the forecast than they thought they were going to have in September. At this stage, I think they're up $1 billion over what they thought they had when they left in March. But the Initiative 1351, the class size reduction, I suspect that they'll suspend it. I think they'll find it 2/3 of votes to suspend that because it didn't pass overwhelmingly, and if it didn't have King County support, it would have failed statewide. And I just think there's enough lawmakers that don't feel pressured into living up with that cost. They're already spending money to shrink class sizes in the lower grades, which I think most research shows definitely has an effect. On McCleary, they're going to take it in pieces. I think they can reach agreement, but I don't know if it's going to take a tax, like a 1% property tax statewide, or if it's going to take smoke and mirrors. I think they're running out of smoke and they're out of mirrors, but they seem to find more and funds that they can go for. There's going to be a lot of talk. Where we're going to get lost, the press and the public, is what is the target number that they're trying to hit in the next 2 years? Because depending on who you talk to, some feel like it's already been taken care of, a lot of it, and it's just, we're going to get taken, it's there. And so that's where we're going to argue for about 3 months, or watch them argue. But do I think there'll be the only statewide tax measure I could see would be a property tax increase. I don't think anyone has a stomach for a sales tax, and so that's what I would be looking for.
How come you didn't mention income tax?
Yeah, please mention income tax.
I think that what we know is that, or what I believe is that the lower classroom sizes, when most of the other unions, particularly the public employee unions, and some of the other unions that frankly are the building trades and so on, when they were so upset that the teachers went ahead and were trying to put their needs ahead of everyone else's and none of this fair play, it was almost like the teachers union was mimicking the legislature, which is those that demand change and those that are not going to have the money to be able to make change aren't going to do anything. Well, in this case, I don't think that any of that lowering class size is going to take place. I don't think we're going to have an income tax. I don't think we're going to cut any of those many different exemptions that basically hit almost every group of friends I know and don't know. The fact is that I don't think that we're going to end up with more of a property tax increase. I think that what we end up doing is we end up settling for less of what we're supposed to be paying and hoping that the Supreme Court doesn't throw us in jail.
I think another interesting part of this whole thing is how teacher accountability is going to play into what happens in Olympia this year, because it's not a partisan issue. I mean, you've seen some prominent Democrats come out and some prominent Republican or Democrat donors who are very frustrated on this issue as well. And I think Republicans don't have a mandate, but I do think that is something that they're really going to push on, and I think we may see some advances in teacher accountability. So,
I think that's true.
Yeah, there's something too that I wanted to throw out there is that the Washington Education Association, they are paying for the lawyers, a lot of it, for the McCleary lawsuit. I mean, McCleary and that directive is there because of their efforts. So there was a question in my mind when the campaign season started, why were they going to try and squeeze, if you will, blood out of the budget turnip when they were already winning on the McCleary on a political standpoint? Would that $5 million, and that's what they invested, been better spent on candidates? They have two members, one in the legislature, one running, who both lost, to reshape the legislature in the image that they wanted to go after an income tax or any revenue. And so I think strategically they may have made a big mistake this cycle in that regard.
I agree.
So on the national level, relating to the local level, our two state senators from Washington State nationally are on the escalator going down.
Yeah.
And so what kind of impact does that have on trade for Washington State, or impact that we had for the last years in Washington, D.C.? What changes do you see?
The most important thing that I had to say on election night, actually I was up here, and the biggest thing I saw was Patty Murray not in charge of that pocketbook is perhaps the most substantial change we will see. And even though that there will be interesting people in charge of the pocketbook, I'm somewhat relieved in knowing that even though Mary Landrieu won't be in charge of the Energy Committee in the Senate, my good friend Lisa Murkowski will be from Alaska. And so from that perspective, there's a little bit of hope that at least some of us will have access to what is better environmental policy than I would have otherwise thought if they had Mitch McConnell in charge of it. So we'll see.
Oh, I would just say that we have the other chamber, and so in Washington State we have some, Dave Reichert's committee is going to change. He's going to probably get a new chairmanship, which will be fairly powerful. We already have Cathy Morris Rogers, who is, I believe, chair of finance committees, and so we're getting there's a little shuffling. So yes, we will lose a little, but we also have some stars here on the other side of the aisle in the House who will help the state as well.
Does Senator Murray run again?
Oh, yeah.
She doesn't
Oh,
get
yeah. I'm not going up there next time, I'll tell you that. But I have to say that the only thing that was humorous for me on election night was, of course, I was involved in actually doing some of the work on the campaign that defeated Sean Parnell. And that, once again, my old state of Alaska, we managed to pull a combo of a, formerly defeated Republican and the Democrat, who actually did a lot of campaigning down here, Alaska native, Byron Malott, is now the new lieutenant governor up there, Democrat candidate for governor, and Bill Walker is the new governor. He's an independent, and all of that is to say, once again, Alaska is still I would say it's the heart of the tricky politics, because people up there just end up voting, what's the biggest screw up I could throw to government? Okay, then I'm going to go vote for these two over here, even though I don't know either one of them. I just know I don't want Sean Parnell in. So it was a pickup for Democrats, sort of.
Okay, one last question before we turn it over to the audience, and that is, you talked about some bright, interesting people going nationally now to represent Washington State, other places. So what's the possibility of getting past gridlock, getting something done, and not mortars firing back and forth or a World War I type warfare?
I mean, there's always going to be some element of gridlock. And I'm not saying there's no hope, but I mean, it's a battle we fight every day. And it makes me, and I'll kind of go back to my comments in the beginning about hope and change. After Obama won, and I saw all this jubilance and all these young people saying, finally, it's all going to be better, it made me really sad for them, because I knew that eventually the disillusionment was going to hit, and it was going to be hard. So I think we all, I mean, there's a joke, it's a cliche, and you probably all heard it, this is the worst system in the world unless you compare it to everything else. So every day we all need to work within our, work locally, work and be involved, but there's no magic bullets here. No one person's going to change the system. Every day we have to try to do a little bit better, and that's all we can do. So, I mean, that's all I would say, because when people think, oh, this one person, this one party, this one election is going to dramatically change everything, it's never going to happen. But we can make steady, positive change every day, and we need to be realistic about it. So that's what I would say.
I would say that what has happened that is laying the groundwork for more work getting done is not just the fact that we have this increase in the number of women in Congress, but we do now have the largest class of people of color we've ever had. We have the largest class of women, and we have the largest class of young people actually now in our Congress. I think it is in the nature of the people we have elected, despite the parties they come from, that gives me more of a sense of optimism.
Gary?
I don't cover, I mean, just as an onlooker, because I don't really write a lot about Congress, but the conversations, I mean, they didn't change the leadership in either of the caucus back there, and I'm going to watch to see how the two Republicans in the Senate and Republicans in the House get along. Unfortunately, the race for 2016 has begun, and so that's going to it feels like it's going to kind of cloud a lot of the conversations over the next year. But sometimes crises do bring people together, and if they suspect there's a crisis nationally, then they'll get behind it. They did, although we only have a few more days, but they did give the president support to train the moderate, whatever that means, rebels in Syria against ISIL, and that probably shocked people at how quickly that happened, and he's going to have to ask them again for support from starting around December 11th, although he may pollute the conversation a little bit when he talks about immigration, so we'll see.
Yep.
So still lots of questions out there. Okay, now there are questions out here. We have Chuck on this side of the room and Bill on this side of the room for badge-wearing members. And remember, this is your time to ask a question. The statements come from up this end.
Dale Rings. Would you care to comment on the flip side of Letterman's comments about where the economy seems to feel good where people on the street aren't feeling it. And when you look at the graphs on the growing income gap, it just gets scarier and scarier. Would you comment on that, please?
I'd be happy to. I would say that you're talking about the issue of the 2016 election. It will be the difference between the 90% of folks who have far less and the 10% who have far more. It will be, I think, an election about equity, and it'll be a question about the rich getting richer and the rest of us having to pay the bill. Yep, I think that is spot on. The Hillary, oh, I'm sorry, was I not supposed to mention that? No,
Anybody else, panelists?
I mean, I think it is out there. It's real. I think initially in some of the $15 an hour minimum wage discussions that have gone on around the country, initially some of the supporters overreached and went too far. In talking to the business community and people like AWB, everyone knows that there is a gap, because what happens is you have a recession, it starts to come back. The people in businesses start to make money. They don't hire back because they've learned how to do more with less, and people at the bottom stay where they are. I mean, it's just the reality of what happens. So you do need to try to figure out a way to get money to the people on the bottom. And everybody is, maybe there's some people on the Republican side who don't like that, but it's reality. And I think we are going to start to see, I don't want to use the word trickle down, but I don't know what else to say. You are going to start to see wages go up, and I think it is the right thing. Right now, I think the debate is just how much. And I think what you've seen in Seattle is a microcosm of that, and what Mayor Murray has done. So I think we're heading generally in the right direction there, I think.
Question? Anybody else have a question? There's a question up here? Yeah.
Yes, I was wondering if... My name is Mike Botwin. I was wondering if you foresee any effort to get rid of the voter suppression that seems to be contagious in Republican-controlled states?
It's a very good question. I would say that what I see is part of the problem with Democrats is that we feel we work twice as hard as Republicans, and we have to work twice as hard just to keep the status quo. However, we are becoming quite in tune with knowing that we're going to have to do that in regards to those states that are going to be using voter suppression. If the Supreme Court doesn't make a giant step forward on this, then I think that we're prepared to actually throw the resources at it. Because I have to say that I don't think it's going to be changed by anything other than the Supreme Court. And right now, the Supreme Court kind of looks to me like it's not going to.
I can't really speak to the larger national, but there does seem to be a trend that the voting process is changing in some states. I mean, right, this year, a lot more early voting. Yeah. Technology may make some of this moot. I mean, if every state starts moving to vote by mail, and we start voting online, or we have an app or something, then it may change the dialogue, and that's what I would be looking for. Although I do remember the first few times I voted, it was went into the polling place, signed my name, crossed it off, there was an ID check, and back then everybody lined up. It didn't seem like it was being suppressed, it just seemed the only way you could vote at a polling place. And so we've kind of gone full circle in some ways.
Let me answer that question this way. As a political consultant, I have never, ever worked on a voter suppression program. It's not a useful activity. I'm not saying it doesn't go on. I get frustrated when there are some members of my party talk about certain initiatives that they think are going to suppress vote. It makes us look bad. It's a waste of time. We need to improve our voting system so that everyone can vote and everyone has access to vote. That's the most important. But the value of voter suppression is widely overblown, in my opinion.
Let me ask a question, though, the two of you, just because as a reporter, explain the difference between suppression and voter targeting. Because campaigns become down to the point of micro-targeting, that they know exactly the voters they want to speak to and they ignore everybody else. At least that's my impression. Right. I mean, I know in the Initiative 594, I received 2 pieces of mail in my district. Other colleagues I work with were getting 5 and 6. Clearly they wanted that community more than our community. So I don't know what the difference.
Well, Cathy will have a lot to say about this, but I'll give you my 2 cents. So there's 2 parts to it. So there's turnout and there's advocacy. So in the beginning of the cycle, what you're doing is you're trying to convince people to vote for a certain candidate or sway them to a certain issue. But you also know, the candidates that, so a midterm election is a classic example where we can talk about this. So we know that turnout's going to be very, very low. So we're trying to figure out, first we want to get people interested enough to vote, and then as we get closer to the election, we want to get them there. So turnout is actually calling them up, and you've all gotten the calls, please vote. Well, there's no advocacy message, right? It's just please vote. And so that's turnout. Now suppression would be to somehow do something that's, you see them at a local level, some little cute little project where they're going to try to, say they're a Republican or a Democrat, but not really be, and they're going to try to make people upset so they don't vote. That's suppression. So you're trying to make people become upset so they don't vote. Quite honestly, candidates and parties do better suppression on the other side than we could ever do. And so, like I said, suppression, you're just trying to have a strategy that somehow makes people upset enough to where they just decide they're not going to do anything. A lot of people here will disagree with this, but I do think it is ridiculous that people say, you should have some form of ID. We have to have ID for everything in this world. Why wouldn't you have it to vote? So, we can work through that. But yeah, we need to make the voting process as open and as accessible as possible. It is the basic tenet of this country, and that's my opinion. I think it's unfortunate that people go down that road because I think it has dubious value.
The greatest voter suppression is boring disillusionment with the parties.
There we go.
And that is the greatest of all. And I look at all of these things that happen. The same thing with campaign finance reform is that when it all comes down to is that I've never seen a situation worldwide where you can actually legislate morality. And we still strive to do that with all the best intentions in terms of campaign finance reform. But every time you do campaign finance reform, I see more people who are making money off of it than I see changes that are really made. If anything, I've thought that what we ought to have is more opportunity for people who are in the professional world of political campaigning to actually have some values and to hold them to the standards by just not hiring the people that are going to actually end up doing sexist, racist things. And frankly, you don't legislate that. That is what we teach our folks. Should we ever have civics in schools again? That would be best.
Don, we have a question here. Okay.
Senator Bernie Sanders has talked on social media lately about a national holiday for voting. And since we're on that topic, would you care to comment on that?
I think it'd be a great thing to do, but given the fact that right now, when people vote is of very important work for me. I have now started tracking when people vote. You have 3 weeks to vote from the time you actually get your ballot. Mostly it's 2 weeks, 6 days, 5 days. And what happens is that when you vote is a time when you want to be able to get people that are aiming. If most of you who have voted in the first 3 or 4 days after you get the ballot, the fact is I know that. I can figure that out. And so from that perspective, that is if you mail it in on the 4th day. But the fact is that what we're doing is we're finding that here in Washington State, we are setting a track record for the country in terms, here in Oregon, in terms of what voting by mail is all about. I think there's more likelihood that more people will be voting by mail, and that national holiday of which Bernie's talking about is not going to be relevant for the West and parts of the South. But I think it's a good idea if it just meant that more people would actually end up voting. I'm not sure that would happen.
I agree.
Okay. Over here.
A question about Citizens United and the position of the Supreme Court in allowing corporations as people. What party platform thinks this is even a remotely good idea? Thank you.
Well, it's not mine.
So, I mean, I have a question of it, because there's a lot of misunderstanding about Citizens United. So do you realize that Citizens United does not allow corporations to give to federal campaigns? Did you guys, so maybe a lot of people don't realize that. It's only for independent expenditures. So it's a ruling that people have thought was unconstitutional for over 20 years, and I think it probably is not. But again, this goes back to my comments earlier. If we didn't have limits and candidates were made to stand on the messages, because there would be no need for independent expenditure if there was no limits. And then Citizens United wouldn't be an issue. And if a candidate went up on TV with something horrible, he'd have to own it. Now he doesn't.
As a reporter, if the FEC followed the way our PDC, if we had disclosure at a national level the way we have in the state, it also would start to shine more light on it, because it's, as a reporter, you can check, and you can know literally the same day some of those big checks arrive. And we follow corporations. I mean, clearly, Boeing is an organization, a company. We watch where do they give money, and we can track that. So I think that the push probably nationally needs to be for disclosure. I mean, we have the technology, and we can make the folks do that. So I think that's probably where the big fight might be.
2016 crystal ball. Who are going to be the two finalists in both parties for the presidential nomination? Wow. Who's going to get it for both parties, and who's going to win overall?
Well, I think Bruce and Cathy will be the two parties, and because they're sitting here, good and evil. Good,
I'm
evil.
good. There we go.
Okay.
Good over here.
Oh.
Well, I do think that Hillary will be the nominee for the Democratic nomination. I've been actually working on the Little People's Campaign, which is Ready for Hillary, which is something you can all go to online, readyforhillary.com. But the fact is that it's actually a pretty good organization that's really just trying to move into the area we did not do so well with last time, which is both technology as well as field operations. And we've already started taking a lot of hits within our own party for actually dissuading or providing something more exciting than the 2014 elections for people to get involved with. And that people were giving us a bad time because we ended up having 140 very successful fundraisers in the last 3 months that really were part of the Hillary operation, including 18 in Washington State. And from that perspective, we've already taken it in terms of people saying, well, you guys should have been working on local campaigns, you should have been working with us, which we think we did. The fact is that when it comes right down to it, I feel very comfortable that, in 2016 we are going to see actually what happens when you have a woman who can bring the kind of negotiation skills to the table that this woman has brought to the world. So I tend to think that that will be us versus the forces of evil that will put up another Bush. So it's okay.
Wow. Okay.
That introduction, Bruce.
So the picture on the Republican side is much murkier, and I think a lot of that's going to dictate. And I think it's also possible that the person who eventually ends up being the nominee, we may not even really be considering right now.
I think that's true.
What happens in 2015 is going to dictate a lot of who that candidate is, and how Obama deals with the Congress, how Republicans handle themselves, and it's kind of depressing from my standpoint, because just as a general rule, your messaging control is great when you have the White House. When you have a bunch of legislators that tend to go off the reservation at any given moment, it really is extraordinarily frustrating. And if the Republicans can demonstrate some message discipline, that may be better. That being said, who do I like personally? I've always been a big Paul Ryan fan. I realize he was, I know him a little bit. He's a sharp guy, but I'm not sure he would even run. Jeb Bush, there's too much baggage there. I'm not sure that that's a possibility. But Christie, I think there might be too much baggage there. So it's really, it's hard for me to, I can't see it. But it's going to be fascinating. Like I said, my biggest concern is can Republicans in 2015 show some unity of purpose? And if they can do that, I think it bodes well for whoever the nominee is. But right now, it's very difficult for me to say.
Well said.
I don't think I should try to make a prediction between the two.
Hillary will be on the D side. That's
I mean, but in a political sense, and just as a reporter, I kind of go back and forth on whether I want to know this soon, right? I mean, reporters, and the problem with the process sometimes is that, you know, each side has their anointed candidate, and then no one within that party will challenge, and then there's no, and you have this sort of predetermined fate. I mean, I think we're going to see it on the state, and you don't see a lot of the incumbents challenged on local races, and part of that is they just, you know, there's this sense of they can't be beaten. So, you know, as a reporter, I'd like to see 2 or 3 on each side, you know, a little, and let them debate, and let's see where the ideas come out. And I think the voters might become more engaged that way.
Well, I can just tell you that that is a wonderful thought, but be careful what you wish for, because in this case, one of the most interesting things for me is that, you know, this year, this next year coming up, we will have the first time we will have district elections for Seattle City Council. Yes, that means that we will break down our area-wide into, you know, 7 different districts with actually a wonderful opportunity for newcomers to come up and start going door to door. Well, there is a model. Austin, Texas just did the same thing. Austin, Texas has 10 city council members, and they had 79 people running for those districts, of which only 2 of the incumbents won. So I'm looking forward to not only a great deal of Donnybrook next year and a lot of kind of like suppression and overkill, but I'm definitely not going to turn on the TV for the last 3 weeks of the campaign.
well, they're not going to run TV at $700 an election.
I know, it's true. It's true.
So
It's
maybe
true.
we'll see how
$7.
it's spent.
$7.
Yeah, we're out of time at this point. Let's hear a big thank you for our panel. I think